Bożena Jarosiewicz-Wargan. I am the head of Human Rights Department at ODIHR, and I will have a pleasure to moderate this working session 15 on the question of freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, and ensuring the collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief in the OSCE area. Before we start talking about the session, I have a little request from our interpreters that when you make your interventions to please speak slowly enough for them to be able to interpret. I also wanted to let you know that the speakers list has now been closed because it has reached 50 speakers. And then perhaps we will just go ahead with the session. OSCE has a breadth of commitments that underline the collective dimension of the rights to freedom of religion or belief for religious or belief communities. These commitments, among other issues, talk about the prevention and elimination of discrimination against individuals or communities on the grounds of religion or belief. The participating states have committed themselves to facilitate a broad range of collective manifestations of the right to freedom of religion or belief. And in Kiev, in 2013, the decision by the OSCE Ministerial Council called on participating states to fully implement their commitments related to this fundamental freedom. But as we know, despite these and other guarantees, challenges in this regard continue to exist in the OSCE area. And in this session, we would like to discuss these challenges and also the means by which participating states, international organizations, civil society, and religious or belief communities can work together to ensure the realization of OSCE commitments in freedom of religion or belief. I have with me today two distinguished introducers. And I will first give the floor to Dr. Ringolds Balodis from Latvia, who is a professor of law and currently the member of the Latvian Parliament and the secretary of the National Security Committee. Prior to that, Dr. Balodis served as the head of the Department of Constitutional Law at the Law Faculty of the University of Latvia. With a focus on law and religion, he served as director of the National and Religious Affairs Department for the Latvia Republic Ministry of Justice in 1996 to 1999. He later held the position of head of the Board of Religious Affairs of the Republic of Latvia in the years 2000 to 2004. And in this capacity, he was a member of the Traditional Confession Consultative Board. He served as president of the Latvian Association for Freedom of Religion from 1999 to 2000. Following this, he also served as a legal expert for the Council of Europe on the draft constitutional agreement between the state of Georgia and the Autonomous Apostolic Church, Orthodox Church of Georgia. In March 2001, Patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, Alexei II, awarded Ringolds Balodis with the second-grade Holy Rodonzhe Cross for his special contribution in strengthening of the relationship between the Christian religions and the state. Dr. Balodis' publications include those in civil ecclesiastical law, constitutional history, and constitutional law written in Latvian, as well as many in Russian, Ukrainian, Lithuanian, Polish, English, and Italian. Dr. Balodis, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Distinguished participants, I would call my report a comparative approach to the freedom of thought, conscience, religions, and belief. The right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief is recognized today in nearly all areas of the world, and in the same time in many places of the world is violated. There are different reasons for that. However, in some OSCE member countries quite frequently the wish of the secular power to introduce its adjustments motivated with a specific approach of the state, combating terrorism, retaining the indivisibility of the state, etc., can be observed. As Kazakhstan researcher Evgeny Zhovtis recognized a couple of months ago, international law and international practice in the field of human rights is the right of, first of all, principles rather than norms. There is the implementation of the fundamental principles of human rights in law enforcement practice within specific legal situation. This is again conceptual value approach or orientation. The international legal acts that constitute fundamental rights provide the general direction to the party applying law, whereas on the national level, the constitution, which is something more than the statute organizing the state, apart from the institutionally political role, has also the function of being the source of general principles. The right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief could be briefly characterized as a principle of religious freedom, needed by everybody alongside the prohibition of discrimination and the freedom of speech, association, and other freedom and rights. They are not needed by OSCE or other supranational organization, but everyone needs them in order to feel human. Those countries that list the catalog of human rights in their constitution are also the principle of religious freedom. The principle of religious freedom is differently reflected both as to its scope and content in the legal system of various countries. In every country, the constitutional norms are often worded on a high level of abstraction. This is to a certain extent allow applying the constitution to the constantly changing societal needs. Scrutiny of the provisions made in the constitution of various democratic states with regard to the rights of religious organizations and individuals to practice religious freedom allows identifying a number of rights and freedom that reveal a wide range that the principle of religious freedom covers. Even though the classification presented below in my speech has been obtained by analyzing the constitutions of individual countries, it must be taken into consideration that, first, the parties that interpreted and apply the constitution of particular state have broad possibilities in interpreting the constitution. I want to draw your attention to the fact that OSCE member states, as any other states, must interpret the provision of their constitution in compliance with the spirit of the age and the legal findings of contemporary democratic legal system. Secondly, even though the constitutional norms of other states are not binding upon any other state, it is clear that a comparative look at the constitution of other states might provide to anyone applying the law a more extensive and exhaustive answer as to what their constitution says. Comparative law, in particular, comparative constitutional law, strives to reveal the regularities that exist in the constitutionalism of the contemporary law and the shared trends. This is particular applies to the regulation on fundamental laws, in the application of which not only the legal practice of one's own country, but various guidelines and standards issued by various bodies such as United Nations and OSCE, which follow from the current understanding of the right that is enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and other international treaties on human rights must be taken into consideration. Before enumerating these rights and freedom, it must be noted that these apply both to individual and to religious organization. First, An individual's right to the freedom of religion, Constitution of Switzerland, the second part of Article 15, Constitution of Estonia, the first and the second part of Article 40, Constitution of the Lithuania, the second part of Article 26, Constitution of Latvia, first part of Article 99, Constitution of Finland, and so on. Second, the right to religious education, the Constitution of Switzerland, the third part of Article 15, Constitution of Poland, the fifth part of Article 53, and so on. Third one, the right to receive religious assistance, CAR, in the place where they are situated. Constitution of Poland, the third part of Article 53. Fourth, the right to not disclose one's religious beliefs or worldviews. Constitution of Poland, the eighth part of Article 53, and so on. Fifth, right, the right to serve in the army without carrying arms. Basic law was Germany, Article 4. Sixth right, the right to perform religious rituals without interference. Constitution of Estonia, the fourth part of Article 40. Constitution of Poland, the second part of Article 53. Seventh right, the right to refuse to participate in religious rituals. Constitution of Finland, the second part of Article 11, and so on. Eighth right, the prohibition of forced proselytism. Then Constitution of Switzerland, the fourth part of Article 15, Constitution of Lithuania, the part of Article 26, and so on. Ninth right, the parents, guardians' right to religious upbringing of their children. In many countries, this right was cited in Constitution. 10th, the right of legal person to religious freedom. 11, the right of religious organization to religious activities in the army, hospitals, penitentiary institution, and others political institution. 12, the right of religious institution to autonomy of decision. 13, the right of religious organization to act in accordance with the international law canons. This is cited in Constitution of Lithuania, the second part of Article 43. 14, right, the right of religious organization to own property, inter alia place of worship. 15, the right of religious organizations to schools for training of the clergy. 16, the right of religious organization to charity institution. I would like to underscore the singling out of the rights of individual to the freedom of religion is not pragmatically correct, since essentially it is only and solely an individual who is or is not able to exercise his freedom, irrespectively of the fact whether the individual is alone or together with others, is a matter of implementing the principle of religious freedom. It is not my intention to show disrespect to the institution of registering religious organization or to question in any other way the important institution of legal persons based upon the system of state register. The system of registration has turned into the pillar for the functioning of the contemporary society. However, permit me to note that the registration takes place to grant to a certain totality of information, a fact, a legal relationship of a phenomenon, legal force, or to put it differently, to presume the existence of the certain legal fact. By the way, it is interesting that the first registrar was a church, which could pass information from its register to sovereign. The civil registry without which citizenship would have been impossible used to be the prerogative of the church. Turning back to the principle of religious freedom, it must be said that the understanding of religious organizations of the need to legally record their activities is a relative concept even for recognized religious denominations. The institution of registration is not a mandatory prerequisite for activities, but it is a confirmation that the state recognizes it and the unfounded restriction of its activities will not occur. Religious freedom, first of all, is applicable to the sphere of an individual's internal consciousness. However, it does not pertain only to reflections and feelings of a religious nature, since various concrete aspects of social life are covered. For example, people with different religious beliefs might experience inconvenience with gathering jointly. The freedom of religion means an individual's right to freely express his faith, not only when being alone, but also when being together with others in public space and together with others expressing their religion. Following key developments affecting freedom of religion or belief in the OSCE area, abiding by the following provisions is essential. As we see, the principles is rather extensively revealed in Constitution. Part of it may be applied to the rights vested in an individual, but other in legal persons, religious organization. It is worth nothing here that the protection of religious freedom applies both to natural persons, every believer, irrespectively of its relationship with the state, and to legal persons, associations of persons, religious organizations, if it's concerned religion, or association, if it's concerned worldview. As regards legal persons, it must be taken into account that the applicability of the clause is relative, but with regard to natural person, absolute. The existence of the registration type and this purpose indicated in the articles of association and the participants are important for legal persons. As guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities published by OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions couples of years ago provide, the freedom of religion or belief is closely linked to other human rights and fundamental freedoms, such as in particular the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly and association, and the right to non-discrimination. The principle of religious freedom absorbs also other human rights which interact and overlap. The right to perform religious rituals in public space and restriction thereof cannot be examined in isolation from the right to association and assembly, as well as the right to practice religious rituals individually in isolation from private life, or the right of religious organization to own property, inter alia to own place of worship, and so on. Likewise, the right to engage in religious propaganda must be viewed in context with the freedom of expression, but the right of religious education must be viewed from the vantage point of the right to education. The right to change one's religious beliefs means also the right to retain one's religious belief. And in case of violent pressure, the right to receive the state's protection against such pressure, proselytism. The freedom of religion protects a person from forced external influence, for example, forced ideological indoctrination, forced administration of psychopharmacological substance, drafting a pacifist into military service. In religious matters, no one can be forced to against his conscience, nor be hindered from acting within limits of reason in accordance with one's conscience, both in private and in public, both alone and in association with others. The right to religious freedom is a person's personal right to civic liberty, which means to be protected within reasonable limits from external coercion exerted by political powers in the field of religion. These natural rights should be recognized in the legal systems of society in such a way as to make it part of civil law. The constitutional safeguards to keep or change religious belief, as well as the conditions that religious beliefs cannot be the grounds for criminal liability, have been expressis verbis defined in the constitution of many countries, for example, Estonia, Article 41. The right to perform religious rituals should be recognized as one of the most fundamental expression of religious freedom. The opinion has been expressed in legal science that the obligation to protect religious rituals is the reason why religious freedom is a separate human right and cannot be covered by the other human rights. Some countries, for example, Constitution of Italy, Article 19, envisage the right to express religious beliefs also by performing religious rituals, inter alia in public. Religious rituals and ceremonies comprise the elements of the respective faith or belief, and the manifestation comprise religious cult. The cult essentially means a system of rituals and ceremonies in the framework of certain religious or faith, and it's to be considered as one of the basic elements of the church as institutionalized religion. The question of effective protection of human rights is a sensitive topic. The right to protection of one's religious belief, for example, symbols and etc., can be interpreted broadly as the right to religious rituals. The state has the obligation to ensure to individuals and religious organizations too, of course, a field of activities where the worldview can evolve and be protected from attacks or restriction by the supporters of other trends of belief or competing religious groups. Clearly, the right to religious education are included in this right. It comprises a subgroup of right, the right to receive education in one's religion, and the right to have teaching of religious ensured, the right to education of the clergy, the right to print and disseminate religious educational literature. Restriction of the freedom of religion, if you speak about that we could notice that even in those countries which have provided in their constitutions that religious freedom is absolute, unrestrictable, it can nevertheless be restricted by law if necessary for the protection of public safety, public order, human rights and morality, as well as for the protection of other persons, fundamental rights and freedoms. The freedom of restriction is not to be limited to reconciling controversially opposing views of the supporters of various religions and groups. In a state which declares itself to be democratic, it must be assumed that when a number of religions coexist, the manifestations of religious freedom can be subject to certain reasonable restrictions. It is necessary to harmonize the interests of the different religious groups and to ensure that the belief of every person is respected. The restriction upon religious freedom must be established by law and must have a legitimate aim. It should be commensurate to the legitimate aim and must serve a certain objective to safeguard other values of constitutional level or other important interests for the protection of which the restriction is necessary. Religious belief cannot be used to justify crimes for ignorating laws. Religious freedom cannot serve as a justification for any infringement of law. Therefore, such manifestation should be restricted in public interests. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Balodis. Unfortunately, our introducer will have to leave us around 4 o'clock because of the flight he has to catch, so very, very many thank you. Thanks for being here with us. And in the spirit of keeping the time, I would immediately perhaps introduce our next distinguished introducer, Dr. Renata Treneska-Deskowska, who is a professor of constitutional law and political system at the law faculty in Skopje. She obtained doctoral degree at the law faculty in Ljubljana, Slovenia. She was a consultant in many international and national projects funded by the United Nations Development Fund, the OSCE, National Democratic Institute, DFID, and others. She has published over 100 books and articles in the field of constitutional law, human rights, and political systems. And we at ODIHR have had an honor to work with Dr. Treneska-Deskowska since 2012 in her capacity as a member of our panel of advisory panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief. Dr. Treneska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished participants, it's my honor to say several words on the importance of ensuring the collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief, because the right to freedom of religion and belief includes interrelated individual and collective aspects, and it is very important for individuals as well as for the groups. For individuals, it is important for their identities. For religious groups, it provides vital guarantee for their survival. Because of its content that provides enjoyment of rights in community with others, the right to freedom of religion and belief is unique in its formulation in human rights documents. So states and international community should provide protection of the individual dimension of this right as well as of its collective dimension, which can be effectively realized only in an organized community of individuals. In the past, the international protection of the right to freedom of religion or belief was more protected through group and minority rights than as individual right. That shows that the history protection of this right meant protection of its collective dimension. After the shift towards the individual approach in human rights law, the collective dimension of this right was maintained because it is intrinsic to this right, because of the existence of religious or belief communities and the way they interact with the individuals. But collective dimension of the freedom of religion and belief does not always overlap with group rights and with the rights of individuals exercised in the community with others. Collective dimension of the freedom of religion or belief is grounded on two pillars in human rights documents. The first one is that this right is enjoyed in community with others, which obligates the states to ensure that the religion or belief may be manifested individually or in a group depending on the choice of the believer. The other pillar of the collective dimension of this right is non-exhaustive list of activities that have collective nature and that should be protected, as are worship, establishing places for worship, teaching, establishment of educational institutions, charitable institutions, etc. Collective dimension of this right does not only affect religious organizations or groups, but also individuals. Individuals suffer when collective identity is not protected. As it is already noted by the European Court of Human Rights, if the organizational life of the religious community is not protected, all other aspects of the individual's freedom of religion would become vulnerable. Now, in the modern world, the challenges to protect the collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief are bigger because comparative experiences show that intervention by states to regulate or to limit manifestations of a religion or belief are more frequent when these manifestations are performed in community with others than when they are performed individually. Protection of the collective dimension of the freedom of religion or belief has great significance for all religious or belief communities. But it must be noted that this dimension is of strategic significance for religious minorities and can play an important role in the protection of the minorities within them or minorities within minorities. There is no hierarchy between the collective and individual dimension of this right, and they must be balanced. But if there are religious practices that interfere with the individual dimension or even with other individual rights, cases with permissible limitation of freedom of religion or belief can arise. The issue of relationship between the state and religion is one of the aspects that can be considered in the effort for full protection of collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief. This relationship between state and religion does not have standard form, and international human rights law does not impose a particular type of this relationship. The leading criteria that must be fulfilled is that everyone enjoys the right to freedom of religion or belief without any discrimination, and states are free in establishing their relationship with the religions as long as they achieve non-discrimination principle. Acquisition of legal personality plays a key role in the effective protection of the collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief. It enables religious communities to exist and act as organized bodies. As you already know, OSCE ODIHR has already addressed this issue last year in the guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities. Another aspect of the collective dimension of freedom of religion and belief is the right of religious groups to freedom or autonomy in their internal affairs. This issue was addressed in 2004 by OSCE ODIHR in the Guidelines for Review of Legislation Pertaining to Religion or Belief. Protection of collective dimension of freedom of religion or belief is also important for the people who have status of refugees. Faced with the current situation of refugees crisis in Europe, I like to point that the states and the international community need to protect refugees without discrimination on the basis of religion and to guarantee them human rights, including the right and freedom of religion or belief. Finally, I would like to stress that understanding of the states of the importance of the collective aspects of freedom of religion or belief is important for overcoming challenges for effective protection of this right. Also, willingness of the states as well as of the international community to address the collective aspects of the freedom of religion or belief will contribute to advancing protection of this human right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed for these remarks. I would like to thank both speakers for reminding us that freedom of religion or belief applies equally to every human being in community with others, and for reminding us that this freedom is linked with so many others fundamental freedoms and human rights, indispensably with freedom of expression, of assembly, and of association. And also thank you to our last introducer for reminding us how important the issue of freedom of religion or belief is in the context of the current situation of refugees. I will now start giving the floor to participants from our speakers list, and because the speakers list is already full, I would kindly ask the speakers to keep their speaking time to 2 minutes and 15 seconds, I am told. And please keep your comments closely related to the topic and brief. And if offering criticism, please make sure that it is constructive. We will start with the delegation of Greece on behalf of the European Union, followed by Atheist Ireland. Greece, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The following EU statement is also on behalf of Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Norway, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Andorra and San Marino. Madam Moderator, the EU attaches the greatest importance to the promotion and protection of freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief as a human right that must be protected everywhere and for everyone, and thus has made it one of its priorities under its human rights foreign policy. The EU Foreign Affairs Council adopted specific guidelines in June 2013 that contain clearly defined priorities and tools for the promotion of freedom of religion or belief worldwide. Our recommendations in relation to this session are the following. Participating states as well as OSCE institutions and field operations should recognize in their structures and activity that violations of the right to freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief are violations of the fundamental freedoms of all citizens, regardless of their religious, deeply held ethical or non-religious beliefs. They should address such human rights violations in a way which does not discriminate against or in favor of any belief, and safeguards the right to freedom of expression, which includes the right to publicly criticize religious or other beliefs. Second, participating states should fulfill their commitments by facilitating groups, associations, and communities existing on the basis of religious or non-religious beliefs to peacefully operate and publicly manifest their beliefs according to their legal status and respecting their autonomy. They should establish fair and clear standards of recognition which do not infringe OSCE commitments and international human rights standards as outlined in the OSCE ODIHR guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities is of utmost importance. Third, we assert that violence against persons, groups, or communities in violation of their rights to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief is unacceptable under any circumstances. Fourth, we highlight the positive role that free and independent media can have on preventing the increase of bias and prejudice based on religion and in promoting mutual respect and understanding, including through specific educational and awareness-raising programs. Fifth, we stress the important role of political leaders, elected and state officials, and civil society in denouncing public manifestations of religious intolerance with a loud and clear voice and in a timely manner. So, due to time constraints, I will limit myself to this, and the full statement will be distributed through the documentation center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for keeping to the time limit. Atheist Ireland will have the floor now, followed by the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association.
Thank you. I'm Michael Nugent from Atheist Ireland, and this is the 5th year that Atheist Ireland has highlighted this same issue at this conference. The OSCE has organised events to combat discrimination explicitly and specifically against Muslims, Jews, Christians and other religions, and it's good that the OSCE has done that. Can you please organise a similar event to combat discrimination explicitly and specifically against atheists? Because we are also discriminated against, and openly so. In Ireland, the state claims that it is constitutionally obliged, not merely permitted, but obliged to discriminate against atheists in order to buttress religion. Several UN human rights committees have told Ireland to stop breaching our rights, and the chair of one of them this year said that Ireland's lack of separation of church and state makes us seem like a developing country. The state not only allows but supports and funds religious discrimination. The state claims exemption from the European Union Equality Directive. There is no effective remedy for breaches of human rights. Our President, judges and Prime Minister must swear religious oaths. The law against blasphemy breaches our right to freedom of expression. Nearly all state-funded primary schools are privately run by churches and are allowed lawfully to discriminate against atheists. State-funded schools integrate religion throughout the entire curriculum. State-funded schools discriminate against atheist and minority faith teachers. The law discriminates against atheists who want to solemnise marriages. The law against abortion breaches the right to health and bodily autonomy. and there's no effective redress for victims of historical abuse by religions. This religious discrimination buttresses the Catholic Church, whose representative here yesterday complained that combating discrimination and hate against LGBT people could distract from the work of the OSCE and could prevent the Catholic Church from telling LGBT people that their actions are unacceptable. This is the same Holy See whose Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor told the BBC that atheists are not fully human. Religious states promote religion, atheist states promote atheism. We want a secular state that promotes neither. A democratic secular state is the only way to respect equally everybody's human right to freedom of religion or belief. Thank you.
Thank you. The Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association will be followed by the delegation of the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Distinguished delegates, the Turkish minority is facing problems regarding the implementation of the Law No. 41/15 of 2013, which is foreseeing the appointment of 240 imams or religious instructors to state schools attended by minority students, to mosques and to offices of muftis, appointed muftis. The minority has already expressed its strong reaction to this law, which actually aims to undermine the Quran courses that have already been provided for a long time by imams in mosques. Nevertheless, as of 2015, more than 100 so-called religious instructors have been hired by the Greek state. Unfortunately, the members of the Turkish minority have seen that these instructors do not have the necessary educational background and qualifications, nor there was a collective demand from the Turkish minority for the hiring of religious instructors to mosques. On the implementation of this law, the Greek state authorities sometimes even resorted to outdated intimidation tactics and policies. To give a concrete example, one of those instructors has been appointed as muezzin to the mosque in the village of Megaderio in the Evros prefecture. Actually, this is against the well-established traditions of the minority, since in all the villages in Western Thrace, Muslims employ the imams and muezzins themselves. The implementation of the law No. 41/15 exemplifies also the Greek authorities' negative intention towards the Turkish minority. Besides members of the Turkish minority numbering around 150,000, there are almost 700,000 Muslims who live outside of Western Thrace, but the implementation of this law started in Western Thrace. Therefore, Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association calls upon the Greek state, first, to respect the Turkish minority's religious autonomy and stop implementation of the appointed imams. Second, to respect the Turkish minority's right to elect its imams according to the minority's long-lasting traditions. And finally, to stop creating disturbance within the Turkish society via appointed officials. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The delegation of the United States, followed by Forum 18. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The United States calls on participating states to strengthen trust and engagement with faith communities writ large, and to work to ensure that laws, policies, and their implementation are adequate to meet international obligations and commitments. In some OSCE participating states, individuals can be detained or imprisoned for simply speaking about their faith in public or gathering for worship without express permission from authorities who claim they are acting to combat extremism. However, such efforts may exacerbate grievances that could lead to radicalization and violence. Uzbekistan, for example, has reportedly imprisoned thousands of people of faith on vague allegations of so-called religious extremism. In countries including Russia, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan, religious groups must undergo a cumbersome and arbitrary registration process, and members of unregistered groups risk civil or criminal sanction for carrying out their activities. In countries such as Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Belarus, governments impose strict limits on the importation, distribution, and sale of religious materials. In Azerbaijan, we are particularly concerned about 2 members of the Jehovah's Witnesses community arrested for allegedly distributing religious literature without the government's approval and held in pretrial detention since February. In Tajikistan, we remain concerned about the so-called parental responsibility law that bars anyone under the age of 18 from attending places of worship, as well as prohibitions that prevent nearly all women in the country from attending mosques. We welcomed the release of 10 individuals imprisoned for their beliefs in Turkmenistan in February of 2010, but are concerned that the authorities there have subsequently imprisoned other believers. And finally, Russia's purported annexation of Crimea and aggressive actions in eastern Ukraine have significantly undermined freedom of religion in areas under Russian and separatist control. Madam Moderator, it was in Kiev 2 years ago that participating states made new commitments on freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, including a commitment to the rights of non-believers. We call on all participating states to implement this and all of our existing commitments on human rights and fundamental freedoms. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Forum 18, followed by the Norwegian Helsinki Committee.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My full remarks are on the website. The joint guidelines on the legal personality of religion or belief communities note that state permission may not be made a condition for the exercise of the freedom of religion or belief. Yet, Russia is revoking the possibility for groups of people to exercise this freedom without informing the state, and in Belarus, Azerbaijan, and all 5 Central Asian participating states, the exercise by groups of people of this freedom without state permission is banned. In Turkey, no belief community, including atheists, is allowed legal existence, as my colleagues Minnie Yildirim from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee and Susan Zakur from Christian Solidarity Worldwide will discuss. What can constructively be done? Participating states, OSCE institutions, and field operations could 1. Insist that human dimension commitments are implemented in full by all participating states. 2. Situate freedom of religion or belief work within an all human rights for all perspective, making its aim implementation of the freedoms of religion or belief and other fundamental freedoms, including those of expression, assembly, and the right to be free from torture. 3. Mainstream work to ensure and promote freedom of religion or belief with its interlinked human rights, building on the other work of the ODIHR Human Rights and Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Departments. And 4, use tools such as the EU Guidelines on the Promotion and Protection of Freedom of Religion or Belief, the OSCE Venice Commission Joint Guidelines on the Legal Personality of Religion or Belief, the Guidelines on the Protection of Human Rights Defenders, and the Toledo Guidelines on the Promotion of Freedom of Religion or Belief within education. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The Norwegian Helsinki Committee will now take the floor, followed by the Christian Solidarity Worldwide.
Thank you. We welcome the publication of the joint guidelines and look forward to the promotion and effective implementation of these guidelines across the OSCE. We recommend that the authorities of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyz Republic implement these guidelines and apply them to reform their legislation and practice pertaining to FORB for all. As Forum 18 has noted, in Kazakhstan and Kyrgyz Republic, the state's practice on religious freedom continues to breach international human rights obligations. It is still compulsory for a religious group to register in order to meet legally. In addition, we recommend that the Turkish government enforce all judgments of the European Court of Human Rights, including those on freedom of religion or belief. Susan Kerr from Christian Solidarity Worldwide will also discuss Turkey's failure to enforce European Court of Human Rights judgments in the field of FORB. I would add that the right to conscientious objection to military service is still not recognized despite 6 judgments by the European Court. We also recommend that the Turkish government enact new provisions without delay and ensure that the non-Muslim community foundations can elect their board members, and thus end restrictions on self-governance. The guidelines provide a valuable tool as a collection of international human rights standards on the right to acquire legal personality. It is with great hope and expectation that we hope to soon publish the guidelines in the Turkish language, and we look forward to cooperating with the Turkish government and the ODIHR in regards of their promotion and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The floor will now go to the Christian Solidarity Worldwide, followed by the Office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Thank you. As the Norwegian Helsinki Committee have noted, Turkey is failing to act in response to all judgments by the European Court of Human Rights. Indeed, by maintaining the policy that only qualifies specific religions to be included on ID cards, Turkey continues to undermine its own anti-discrimination laws. Worryingly, Alevis and Baha'is still do not even fall into the category of religious communities considered by the government. Moreover, Turkish legislation still compels all primary and secondary school students to attend religious culture and knowledge of ethics classes, which take their moral education from Sunni Islam. No exemptions exist for Alevis, Baha'is, Jehovah's Witnesses, or atheists. Where exemptions do exist for Jewish and Christian children, parents can face delays in proving their religion or even harassment and intimidation. Restrictive legislation also continues to prevent non-Muslim communities from being able to acquire premises for places of worship, thereby infringing upon their right to manifest their religion or belief in community with others. Christian Solidarity Worldwide therefore joins with Forum 18 and the Norwegian Helsinki Committee in welcoming the joint guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities, which could be of use to the Turkish government in trying to resolve these issues. Adding to the recommendations we made earlier, we call on the Turkish government to either enact a clear and efficient system that exempts all religious minorities from RCKE classes or to abolish these classes altogether. In line with recommendations by states during its 2 UN Universal Periodic Reviews, Turkey should ensure full protection of the rights of all faiths, including Alevis, Jehovah's Witnesses, Baha'is, and other religious communities not covered by the 1935 law foundations, removing restrictions that prevent these groups from establishing places of worship and manifesting their religion as communities with legal personality. Ensure that the Turkish state, including the Diyanet, acts in a non-discriminatory manner in accordance with Turkey's international human rights commitments on freedom of religion or belief. Remove the box denoting religion on all ID cards. Monitor the implementation of the decree returning confiscated properties to minority communities to ensure that the General Foundations Board of Turkey processes each application for return assets quickly and fairly. Our full statement will appear on the website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Office of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will now take the floor, followed by Baha'i International Community Brussels Office.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Excellencies, dear participants. I'm honored to represent the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a Christian faith with more than 15 million members worldwide and established in most of the OSCE participating states, on matters related to freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief. Thank you for the work that you're doing to protect this important right. We would like to address the participating states about the importance of regular, structured, and open dialogue with churches and religious communities. Religion and government cannot ignore each other, nor need they be enemies. The spheres of spirituality and law differ, but they cooperate best when freedom of conscience and the common good make space for one another. This engagement is based on an understanding that promotes civility, protects inalienable rights, and works towards the common good. Of course, this civic engagement does not require that religion has the most powerful voice in society. It simply accords religion an equal opportunity to voice its concerns and shape important public matters. We commend the European Union for its commitment to an open, transparent, and regular dialogue with churches according to Article 17 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, and we invite participating states to adopt similar provisions at the national and local level, if not already in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Baha'i International Community Brussels Office will now take the floor, followed by Pax Europa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Baha'i International Community believes that the question of freedom of religion and belief really is intrinsically linked with the question as to the role religion plays in society. We believe that the promotion of the right of freedom of religion and belief needs to go hand in hand with a deeper understanding as to why it is so important that each individual can exercise this right. It also needs to go hand in hand with a deeper understanding as to how religion actually contributes to society. Now, it is not surprising that our perception of how religion contributes tends to get clouded, given some very destructive expressions of religious belief that appear throughout the world and in Europe today. And these expressions are very well documented, and naturally many of our deliberations and efforts go into addressing them and also containing them. The Baha'i international community, however, feels that it is timely to start a collective process of identifying a framework that allows the constructive powers of religion to find expression. We therefore encourage the OSCE to start a process of exploring how religion, its concepts, its insights, and its principles contribute to resolving conflict, contribute to facilitating greater social harmony, and contribute to creating stable and peaceful societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pax Europa will be followed by the delegation of the Russian Federation. Pax Europa.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The annotated agenda is very explicit in addressing the rising problem of anti-Semitism in the participating states. Anyone with even the least understanding of history should be surprised that this problem can emerge once again, as it should have been buried solid in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945. However, the scourge of anti-Semitism has returned, and we need to deal with it quite urgently. Europe has, over the last century, suffered significant loss of its Jewish population, either to emigration or to outright genocide, and that loss of valuable cultural heritage must not be repeated. From the field of criminal justice, it should be clear that focusing on crime victims does not suffice. We need to identify perpetrators, identify them, and bring them to justice. This effectively means that we need to put an end to the evil of tolerating intolerance. This also means that when British schools are dropping the Jewish Holocaust from history lessons to avoid offending Muslim pupils, they are doing exactly the opposite of what we urgently need. Teaching the truth of the Holocaust should be categorically more important than religious sensitivities. What we need to do is to identify and confront the sources of anti-Semitism, to take appropriate action to delegitimize and marginalize such ideas. If that means we need the courage to identify and counter such ideas in books and scripture considered holy in some circles, so be it. Pax Europa thus recommends that religion must not be a cover for promoting anti-Semitic sentiment and action, that teachers are supported in teaching about the Holocaust even in the face of Islamist pressure, that any public grants or privileges be revoked from organizations promoting anti-Semitic dogma. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The delegation of the Russian Federation, followed by the Constantinopolitan Society. Russian Federation, you have the floor.
Благодарю вас.
Thank you. Freedom of thought, conscience and belief today is taking on special significance. We are witnessing tragedies which are relatively unprecedented in recent European history. For a number of years, Russia has been cautioning its partners, both within the OSCE and elsewhere, about dangers of interfering in events in the Middle East. The result is that today we are seeing, including in the OSCE space, conflicts between fundamental rights and freedoms. What are we seeing? We're seeing hundreds of thousands of people fleeing terror and wars as they strive to defend their own right to life, often stumbling into barbed wire and tear gas. They are faced also with one of the main European values, freedom of expression, which is often more like a policy of free-for-all or permissiveness. In Russia, we would like to remember how at times the terrorist attack in Moscow in 2013 was covered. Now we're talking about the latest creation of the Charlie Hebdo paper. We have to say that time for abstract discussions concerning the order of priority of fundamental freedoms is running out. We need to normalize the situation in regions from which today thousands of people have to flee. But we are also concerned by the unfolding crisis in Europe of identity of the traditional Christian population and the rise of xenophobia. We are seeing an increase in xenophobia, including in those countries where there's only a very small Muslim population. It seems that efforts by some political elements to pander to electoral mood is artificially inflating the problem. The anti-Islamic utterances are becoming widespread. There are cases in the OSCE region of an emerging crisis of intercivilizational and interreligious dialogue. All this is happening against a backdrop of barbaric massacre of Christians in the Middle East and North African region, which is the cradle of Christ himself. We are convinced that in the OSCE there is sufficient political will and the necessary tools to devise effective mechanisms for ensuring fundamental freedoms throughout the single European space. Thank you for your attention.
The Constantinopolitan Society will be followed by the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe.
We keep on underlying that the Turkish government has not so far alleviated or done away with serious restrictions on freedom of religion or belief, including state policies and suffocating regulations of the past that deny legal personality to the ecumenical patriarchate. It should be noted that the United States Commission on International Freedom, in its 2015 annual report, in the key findings underlines that the overall landscape for democracy and human rights has deteriorated significantly in the last 2 years with troubling implications for freedom of religion or belief in Turkey. Turkey should end Turkish citizenship requirements for the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Holy Synod of the Greek Orthodox Church and permit them to select and appoint their leadership and members in accordance with their internal guidelines and beliefs. Also, Turkish government should lift the prerequisite that the election of the Ecumenical Patriarch depends on the pre-approval of the Prefecture of Istanbul. The Greek Orthodox Theological School of Chalki remains closed, despite promises and public statements of support for its reopening by President Erdogan and former President Gül. The Theological School of Chalki should be reopened without preconditions and with exactly the same status it held prior to its closure in 1971. We would like to underline that respect for religious freedoms is the responsibility of every state. It is not a matter that circulars and statements of good intentions alone can address. It calls for firm will, constructive dialogue, and common understanding. Respect for these rights is beneficial for Turkey, first and foremost, as it will strengthen its social, ethnic, and religious structures and safeguard pluralism and diversity in this country. Finally, every process is judged by the real and measurable outcome it brings to a challenging situation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. The Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe will be followed by Act for America 5280 Coalition.
Thank you very much. The legal status of the Muslim minority is based on the Treaty of Lausanne of 1923 and the educational and religious autonomy of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace has been in practice under the Greek military junta regime in 1967. Due to the lack of implementation of commitments related to freedom of religion or belief undertaken by Greek authorities, the right of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace to elect its own religious leaders is not recognized. After problems in 1985, the minority elected its own muftis in 1990. However, public authorities did not recognize the muftis who were elected by members of the Muslim community. The muftis elected were prosecuted and sentenced to prison for the illegal use of religious symbols. In 1996, Mr. Ibrahim Sherif, the elected mufti in Komotini, stood up in a trial in Thessaloniki for false pretense of authority and was sentenced to a 6-month imprisonment, though he was released after appeal. In August 2015, Ibrahim Sherif has received a subpoena to give a deposition to the Attorney General and has given his deposition. Mr. Ibrahim Sherif will be adjudicated in a case appealed by a Greek citizen on the ground of usurping the muftiate. Greek authorities stated that they are examining possible ways of introducing new elements that would allow on an even more representative and transparent process for the selection of the muftis. Any efforts to improve this framework by Greek authorities should be in accordance with the right and freedoms granted to the minority by international treaties. A dialogue mechanism on equal footing should be established by Greek authorities, and the best interest of the minority should be the priority in solution of the mufti issue. We call upon the government of Greece not to diminish by no means autonomous establishment of the Turkish minority of Western Thrace in accordance with Athens Treaty of 1913 and its third protocol, to recognize the right of the Turkish minority to its own religious leaders and repeal Law 4115/2013, to fully guarantee and realize that the members of the Turkish minority would enjoy the same treatment and security in law and in fact as other Greek nationals in the management and control of their religious institutions, and that they could exercise their religion freely there. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Act for America 5280 coalition will be followed by the Greek Helsinki Monitor.
Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Religious liberty is a basic freedom in the West. The First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This means there is a clear separation of church and state, with religion an individual and private matter. But it seems in most of these public forums, the discussion of freedom of religion has been finessed by self-defined Islamic entities to the subject of combating the defamation of religions. And even though such documents refer to religions, the texts clearly refer only to Islam. The reason for this seems clear. In the West, freedom of religion includes changing one's religion or even choosing not to belong at all. This is not the case in other faiths. In fact, in some religions, to leave is a capital offense. So it's understandable that some of these entities would prefer to change the subject and make accusations of defamation and Islamophobia against anyone who brings up such matters. The Act for America 5280 Coalition believes that the discussion of unpleasant aspects is essential to true dialogue, and bringing up well-known published facts is certainly not hate, bigotry, and slander in the Western sense. Certainly, unpleasant facts about the West are brought up all the time. The Act for America 5280 Coalition recommends that the Western entities and governments stay on point when discussing these important issues and not be distracted or deflected by vague and undefinable terms. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. The Greek Helsinki Monitor will be followed by the Collective Against Islamophobia in Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In the documentation which is available online, we have raised 3 issues. The first one is the continuing mandatory declaration of one's religious or non-religious belief in judicial procedures, usually oath-taking, although the law has changed following convictions by European courts. The second is the existence of blasphemy laws in Greece and their application, with most recently having a well-known case of Philippos Loizos, the creator of satirical Elder Pastichos website, who got a suspended 10-month prison sentence. And thirdly, they need to declare one's religion to get an exemption from religious education. I'll read the recommendations. Greece should see to it properly that prosecuting and judicial authorities stop violating religious freedom, upholding instead the amending provisions of Code of Criminal Procedures, and take disciplinary and criminal proceedings against all those who continue to use the old provisions in violation of that law. Secondly, Greece should abolish blasphemy laws, that is Articles 198 and 199 of its criminal code. And finally, Greece should promptly amend recent circulars that require parents to declare the non-Orthodox Christian identity of their children as a prerequisite to be exempted from religious education, as well as revise the content of religious education so as to include an introduction to the history and the main values of each religion and be neutral towards all religions, including the prevailing one. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The floor will now be for the Collective Against Islamophobia in Belgium, followed by the Rhodos cause and the Dodecanese Turks Culture and Solidarity Association.
Thank you very much. The member states, the representative of ODIHR, the US delegation, the Serbian delegation, and the German delegation. I would like to share with you, I would like to take this time to share with you and all of you my concern about something that happened this morning in this respectful assembly. To go a step further, tackling hate speech and misunderstanding, we need to be critical and self-critical about what occurs outside this assembly, but also inside this assembly. The personal representative of anti-Semitism, Mr. Andrew Becker, has made a declaration specifically targeting on his third point, Muslims and people living in deprived areas, mainly Arab people and black people, blaming them for the rise of anti-Semitism, against all previous commitments related to tolerance and non-discrimination. This person has been trusting this position for more than 10 years now, using it as a political platform to lobby for his own strange and intolerant views, fueling and spreading suspicion against a specific community, which again says a lot about our vision of diversity and accountability. So I have a simple question, specifically to the attention of ODIHR, the US delegation, the Serbian delegation, and the German delegation. Do you share Mr. Becker's views and opinions? If yes, then how do you reconcile this with the OSCE commitments? And if no, why do you continue hiring him and supporting him? From our side, if the OSCE continues sponsoring such views, then we will know where to stand. Our common values should be preserved by all of us, and this is why we should be critical against others, but more with our close relations. Thank you for your kind attention, and thank you to listen me on this important issue for the quality of our work and the partnership we should build to fight all the discrimination and intolerance against everyone and every communities. Thank you.
Thank you. The Rhodos cause and the Dodecanese Turks Culture and Solidarity Association will be followed by the European Humanist Association.
Thank you. I am Mustafa Kaymakçı. As the president of Rhodos and Kos Solidarity Association, I would like to stress the religion problems of the Turks living in Rhodos and Kos, which plays in the Aegean Sea. The world public opinion has a misconception that the presence of the Turks living in Greece is only limited to the Western Thrace. But in addition to the Turkish population, in the Western Thrace, about 6,000 Turks live mostly in Rhodos and Kos. There are many problems of Turks. One of them is religious problems. Until 1937, the Italian administration allowed the Turkish and religion lessons both at the Turkish schools. the Turkish children were allowed to attend the Islam religion lessons only at schools by the Italian administration. After 1947, the Greek administration forced the Hojas, whose salaries were paid by school foundation, to be government officers and started education in Greek in the Turkish schools. In 1972, the Greek authorities closed all Turkish schools on the islands and prohibited education in Turkish and religion lessons. This caused the immigration of the great numbers of the Turks to Turkey. Today, the Turkish children who attend the public schools in Greece are accepted from Christian religion lessons. The great majority of the Turks in Rhodos do not trust the Mufti, as he is isolated from the Turks and they only serves the interests and policies of the Greek government. In short, the Greek government denies the national identity Turkish community, but only accept their religion identity as the Muslim Greek citizens. However, there is a paradox in the present policies of the Greek governments. Though they define the Turks as Muslim Greek citizens, intrinsically they do not allow them to learn their religion too. Thank you.
Thank you. The European Humanist Association will be followed by Think Out.
Thank you very much, Mrs.
Thank you.
Moderator.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This is the European Humanist Federation, actually. I would like to raise your attention on a fundamental right that remains unprotected in several participating states and that is increasingly threatened in others as a consequence of a widespread bias against individual behaviors that, in the eyes of many politicians, are not consistent with the ethical opinions and religious belief of the alleged majority of the population. That is the right of every woman to decide over her body and to terminate a pregnancy. As we speak, abortion right is threatened in several countries where it is legal, and now restrictive laws were passed in Spain and Portugal. In Italy and Poland, although abortion is legal under certain circumstances, many women still face difficulties in finding a doctor because of government's failure to regulate conscientious objection in medical care. In Ireland and Malta, it is still largely or totally illegal. We believe in every woman's fundamental right to refuse a parental project. But we are also worried because restrictive abortion laws do violate women's various rights. First, restricting abortion rights is, first of all, a violation of women's right to life. According to the World Health Organization, 13% of maternal mortality is directly due to unsafe abortions. Second, denying safe and legal abortion is also a clear breach in women's fundamental right to health. Third, denying safe and legal abortion to women may lead to situations that constitute cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment. Fourth, denying abortion to women also clearly contradicts the protection of gender equality as governments are legally bound to promote, as abortion is a medical procedure that only women need. The OSCE clearly recommended to the participant states to protect and promote the health of women and girls as a part of its long-standing commitment to defend gender equality. We urge the member states to ensure women, both in law and in practice, legal and safe access to abortion when they request it. And finally, we respectfully call on the OSCE to include the promotion of abortion right, at least under certain circumstances, as part of its human rights agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I can now finally give the floor to Think Out. and apologies for this confusion, followed by the European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Moderator. On behalf of Think Out, I wish everybody a good afternoon and a productive program. Think Out is a Belgium-based NGO who aims to integrate and enforce different cultures living together while respecting the human rights. Today the topic of this session is fundamental freedoms, including freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief. I'd like to start my speech with a question of which I can't find the answer. Each year we are gathering here to discuss human rights, and therefore we put a lot of energy in this organization. What I don't understand is the following: how come that on the one hand each member state makes efforts to assure the human rights, and on the other hand, in each member state, the human rights are not respected by its own representatives and institutions. For instance, in my own country, Belgium, forbids me as a Muslim to celebrate the holiday of sacrifice, claiming that Muslims slaughter animals. Muslims do not slaughter animals. We have got to get rid of the word slaughter and halal slaughter. Both notions are Islamophobic. For Muslims, the relevant religion is the holiday, and it's called Holiday of Sacrifice, where the meaning of sacrifice is double. One, the word Qurban is sacrifice, coming close to God. Two, the goal of charity, so cutting meat is not the main point when celebrating the holiday of sacrifice. In Article 9 of the Convention of Human Rights, it assures freedom of religion, which means that at the first place that a member state cannot interfere with the perception of religion or the way Muslims practice their religion unless exceptions specified in law. The same thing is applied to the headscarf. Headscarf is not a symbol for Muslims, it's a part of the belief itself. So forbidding a headscarf is transgressing Article 9 of the European Convention. Belgium, as a member state who has sent its representatives to OSCE, forbids some parts of practicing a religion. It's transgressing the European Convent. Member states must show respect to the way a religion is being practiced. Thank you.
Thank you. The European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion will now take the floor, followed by the Values Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. As the new waves of refugees arrive in Europe and the United States, Muslims and Islam occupy even more attention in the minds of politicians, public opinion shapers, and ordinary citizens. EMISCO is deeply worried about the rise of attacks motivated by the anti-Muslim hatred, especially since the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack. We declare unambiguously that international developments, including acts of terror perpetrated by violent individuals or groups self-identifying with Islam, can never justify intolerance against Muslims. We are still waiting for the concretization of the ministerial declaration on tolerance against Muslims, which will help a lot to ensure the effective struggle of this rising form of specific hatred. We demand the use of Islamophobia in the official documents as an established concept, defined as a form of discrimination and racism, as well as an orchestrated fear targeting individuals and communities based on their alleged adherence to the Islamic faith. We call upon the participating states to, first one, encourage political leaders and public figures to speak out strongly and promptly when anti-Muslim incidents occur, as well as for other majority religions. Secondly, redefine European values through an inclusive, pluralistic approach based on a reflexive virtue ethics that acknowledges the fruitful historical interaction between Judeo-Christian and Muslim values in order to move towards a more inclusive definition of what Europe stands for today. Also, make progress in intercultural and interreligious education as recommended in the Council of Europe reference book on religious diversity and intercultural education published in 2007 in line with the European Cultural Convention of 1954, which underlines the need for education to develop mutual understanding between peoples. highlights patterns on intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. In order to conclude, dear presence, we underline that Islamophobia is not just a Muslim issue, it's a European issue for all of us. And everything that needs to be done should be done for a new Europe without Islamophobia. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The Values Foundation will now take the floor, followed by the delegation of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Every one of us would support the aims of this session to promote tolerance and non-discrimination equally and for all. However, I would like to appeal to all OSCE member states, including the UK, to consider how this equality can be achieved without losing the benefits of Christianity or eroding the rights of Christians. Because Christianity has shaped the values of many of the European nations represented here today, and many of the freedoms we are all seeking to protect actually originate from Christianity. And we should not forget the innumerable Christian martyrs in Britain and Europe, both Catholic and Protestant, who believed in these freedoms enough to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect them. Why should it be necessary to remind ourselves of this? Because many Christians in the UK today, and perhaps in other OSCE countries, feel discriminated against and marginalised from public life. Michael Gove, former UK Education Secretary, has said, "To call yourself a Christian in contemporary Britain is to invite pity, condescension or cool dismissal." And Sir Eric Pickles, UK Special Envoy for Post-Holocaust Issues, has said, "In recent years, long-standing British liberties of freedom of religion have been undermined by the intolerance of aggressive secularism." Current examples of this intolerance against Christians in Britain include a growing number of Christian street evangelists being arrested, perceived discrimination by Ofsted, the Schools Inspection Authority, against Christian schools, employment issues where Christians have suffered because they refuse to carry out actions against their conscience or even because they state their views, and media attacks against fundamental Christian minorities. On behalf of all Christians in Europe of whatever church or group, we respectfully suggest that the UK government and all OSCE member states follow these principles when drafting new legislation, such as the proposed counter-extremism bill in the UK. Firstly, to consult with Christian leaders, including those from smaller fundamentalist churches, and secondly, to make provision for Christian conscience in any proposed legislation. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you. The delegation of Canada will now take the floor, followed by the Cultural Association of Pomaks. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Religious persecution is a growing global issue. It is imperative that all countries work to respect, protect, and advance the right to freedom of religion or belief around the world. We must be willing to speak out on egregious violations of the right to freedom of religion or belief and be willing to denounce violence against human rights defenders and attacks on places of worship around the world. One major challenge faced by religious communities in some OSCE participating states is the lack of recognition resulting from onerous and opaque state registration procedures. This prevents these communities from practicing their faith freely and without discrimination. We hope that ODIHR's 2015 guidelines on the legal personality of religious or belief communities will help participating states address these issues. We welcome this year's focus at the OSCE on interfaith and intercultural dialogue. But for such dialogues to be truly inclusive, states must recognize and respect the rights of individuals belonging to religious communities. Canada understands, and research shows, that religious freedom, pluralism, peace, and security foster the growth of strong democratic institutions and long-term prosperity. Individuals who are free to practice their faith in safety and security are also free to contribute to the economic, cultural, and political developments of the country. This is why Canada is proud to support ODIHR's program on freedom of religion or belief.
Canada has 4 recommendations for OSCE participating states for this session. First, to ensure that religious communities are able to peacefully practice their religion without the threat of violence and persecution. Second, to respect the right of those individuals who wish to change their belief or religion or to hold no belief at all. Third, to ensure that legislation pertaining to registration of religious organizations embrace the principles of Article 18 of the ICCPR and are not used to obstruct or curtail activities of religious communities. And finally, to cooperate and work closely with ODIHR to benefit from its expertise and experience. Thank you.
Thank you. The Cultural Association of Pomaks will be followed by Türkische Gemeinschaft.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Emine Boruci. I represent the Pomak Union of Xanthi. Excuse me, but my colleague will continue since my English is not that good.
Thank you. The Cultural Union of the Pomaks of Xanthi is an NGO founded in 2007 in order to promote the cultural, linguistic, and religious identity of the Pomaks of Thrace, Greece, in circles outside the minority, as well as the cultural, linguistic, and religious awareness among Pomaks themselves. Pomaks reside in the mountainous region of Xanthi and are therefore cut off of the modern life of the city of Xanthi, focusing on their housekeeping for women and the cultivation of tobacco for men. The main elements that distinguish Pomaks from other parts of the Muslim minority of Western Thrace are our native language, Pomatske, our traditions, and our history. Pomaks form a large part of the Muslim minority of Western Thrace in Greece, yet they are the less representative minority political and cultural life, a minority within minority. This is mainly due to the forced linkage between Pomaks and Turks, whereas the only element we share in common is our religion. Pomaks are Muslim Greek citizens who strive to preserve their identity, culture, and mother tongue. One of our biggest problems is the problem of minority education. In the Pomak villages of Western Thrace, our children can only attend bilingual minority schools when the only languages being taught are Greek and Turkish. They are not given the chance to attend public schools, but the Holy Quran is nowadays being taught, and Pomaks have finally the opportunity to be educated on religious issues and the codex and meaning of the Holy Quran under Law 4115 and the appointment of Muslim religious teachers in public schools. We at the Cultural Union of the Pomaks of Xanthi want equal educational opportunities for the Pomaks. We want the same quality of education for our children, just like the education offered to all Greek citizens. We should not be treated like citizens of a foreign country. We live in Greece and we want to learn the Greek language just like all other Greeks. On the other hand, we also want to keep our native language, our traditions, and our religion. Articles 40 and 45 of the Treaty of Lausanne, the peace treaty that provided for the protection of the Muslim minority in Greece, mention the right of the Muslim minorities of Western Thrace to be educated in their own language. However, Pomak children are not taught the language of our culture and forefathers. On the contrary, they are taught the language and culture of a foreign country, Turkey, that has nothing to do with us. We call upon the Greek Ministry of Education to create public schools in the Pomak villages where the Holy Quran will be taught to our children. We want to escape the clutches of a minority education that does not meet the needs of our people and forces an identity in a language that is foreign to our children and hinders integration into Greek society. We want the respect to our religious sentiments outside the framework and context of foreign political and national attention. Thank you.
Thank you. The Türkische Gemeinschaft will now take the floor, followed by the Russian Association for International Cooperation.
Das aktuelle Thema heute ist das.
The topic today is the drama of refugees that are created by crimes taking place now in Iraq and in Syria. We condemn these terrorist acts against men, women, and children, but we cannot place the responsibility on the Islamic world. They're incompatible with them. Hundreds of thousands have lost their lives and their homelands. Many have found refuge in neighboring countries, Turkey, Libya, and Jordan. This is a very humane action on the part of these countries for the past 4 years. These refugees are trying to find another home in Europe. However, there is a refusal on Europe's part and growing worry in the host countries. Such events must serve to, or can serve to, reignite negative images of certain ethnic groups. This yields the way to marginalization and discrimination, especially against Muslims. This is something which is very bad for integration in Europe as a whole. We must note that the Turks, who have lived for approximately 50 years now in Europe, and others are well integrated. We should consider that given the events in the Middle East, it is counterproductive for social harmony in Europe that Muslims be suspected of anything. On the contrary, the bridge between Europe and the Islamic world is one which leads us to economic and other kinds of cooperation. We want for politicians to be aware of their responsibilities and not to use destructive rhetoric. The tensions that have been created by the refugee crisis must be met with constructive solutions. The media, in informing the public, must remain true to their own ethical commitments and respect the dignity and the rights of those who belong to other cultures. Thus, it is important to solve problems through dialogue. This is something which is not only the responsibility of politicians and the media, but it is our common responsibility. We would like to thank ODIHR for all of its efforts against intolerance and state our desire to support them.
A civil society representative from the Russian community in Crimea.
Благодарю.
Thank you. I represent the Russian Association for International Cooperation. I have to say that I'm sorry that one of the leaders of my organization could not take part in this event due to the fact that they were denied access to Poland by the Polish authorities due to their being on the sanctions list. The human dimension is the cornerstone of international security. Security and fundamental rights are intrinsically linked. This was once again showed by the conflict in the Middle East and the events in Ukraine. Illicit sanctions against many Russian-speaking people of the peninsula have, a good example of this. In Kiev, people started cracking down on the Maidan pro-Russian parts. This goes against the free will of the people of the Crimean Peninsula to rejoin Russia. I'm very sorry, but could you please stick to today's topic? The clear outcome of this was the March referendum in Crimea, which took place in full compliance with international law and in full compliance with the Constitution. This expression of free will has led to a blockade by the US and the EU and Ukraine, which goes against the fundamental principles of the United Nations and the OSCE. It curtails the freedom of movement of Crimeans. For the last year and a half, events have clearly showed that respect for human rights by democratic structures is necessary, but for that there must be stability at the within society. We would like the rights of religious communities to be upheld because the situation in the Republic are protected by the articles in the Russian Federation's constitution and by a number of articles in the Crimean constitution. We think that all was done to ensure that this would be kept that way.
The regional public organization Russian community in Crimea will be followed by the delegation of the United Kingdom.
Добрый день, уважаемые.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dmitry Polonsky, and I represent the Russian community in Crimea. We're a group of regional public organizations. There is a tragedy ongoing now because of a propaganda on the part of the forcing of Ukrainian language on the Russian language majority in Crimea, as well as the actions of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kiev Patriarchate. The most democratic procedure in the world was the Crimean referendum, and many do not as of yet recognize this. I'm holding 120 pages in my hand. These are the report of the Mission on Human Rights in Crimea. I don't see any point in commenting on this anti-Crimean hysterics. I just would like to note that the international community should note the fact that there are more than 150 ethnic groups in Crimea with various religious organizations. There is a rehabilitation of those who were deported from Crimea. Among the various ethnic groups represented in Crimea are the Crimean Tatars. The main Christian and Muslim holidays are able to be enjoyed by all. I'd like to draw your attention to just a few things, and that is the criminal investigation of persons who have committed crimes under the criminal code of the Russian Federation. I'm not mentioning the fact that it is Russian legislation, of course, that is followed in Crimea. I'd also like to note that there are speakers of both Ukrainian and Ukrainian Tatar language in Crimea. We also see guarantees of freedom of movement in Crimea, as well as entry for members of the international press. In concluding my short statement, let's tell the truth about international law. That's the only way to move forward. Thank you.
The delegation of the United Kingdom will be now followed by the Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan. UK, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, and I will attempt to keep to the subject of this afternoon's discussion. I fully subscribe to the statement made by Greece on behalf of the European Union, and I would add some comments in our national capacity. The United Kingdom attaches great importance to the promotion and protection of freedom of religion or belief. We regularly urge governments to protect the right of all to practice their religion free from persecution or discrimination. The freedom to practice, change, or share one's faith or belief without discrimination or violent opposition is a fundamental human right that all people should enjoy. Societies which guarantee freedom of religion or belief are generally stronger, fairer, and more confident. It is our firm conviction that international human rights law protects individuals and not their particular beliefs from discrimination or persecution on the grounds of religion or belief. The right to disagree about and criticize religion or belief is itself part of freedom of religion or belief, as well as freedom of expression. The UK government is a strong supporter of freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief, and views them as interdependent, interrelated, and mutually reinforcing. In the UK, we prohibit the use or display of threatening words or behavior, but only if it is intended to stir up religious hatred against individual religious or non-religious believers. It is also important that persons who change or leave their religion or belief, those holding non-theistic or atheistic beliefs, and those who do not profess any religion or belief are equally protected. We were therefore pleased that the 2013 Kiev OSCE ministerial decision on the freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief recognized the importance of also protecting non-believers from intolerance. In conclusion, we call on all participating states to stand against intolerance in all its forms and seek a world in which everyone has equal access to rights, justice, education and economic opportunities, regardless of ethnicity, religion or belief. Thank you.
Thank you. The Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan will be followed by the European Association of Jehovah's Christian Witnesses, Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to underscore that one of the main problems that we are currently grappling with, not just in Kazakhstan, but indeed in all of Central Asia, is the attempt by states to regulate everything when it comes to spreading literature or carrying out services or the ethnic preferences of certain religious views, and so on and so forth. In practice, this is supposed to strengthen security and stability in the region. Small progress has been made in terms of establishing a dialogue between the state and representatives of all faiths, and this work must be continued. I would also like to say that the guiding principles on the legal status of religious organizations and organizations holding certain beliefs, principles that were prepared in conjunction with the Venice Commission and the ODIHR, and which were published this year. You will find them printed in this venue. These principles are a very timely document which could indeed help address a broad range of problems that have arisen or are arising in the region. I would like to make two recommendations in connection with this. Firstly, I believe that that ODIHR and OSCE field missions should help Kazakhstan carry out seminars to raise awareness about these guiding principles among particular communities and at the authorities level. And by that I mean all three branches, executive, legislative and the judiciary. This would help seek productive solutions to certain problems. That's my first recommendation. The second one would be to strengthen dialogue with all religious communities and communities holding certain beliefs in Central Asian countries. I would therefore like to recommend that the OSCE should take the initiative to organize a regional conference on strengthening state and religious communities dialogue and to foster the exchange of best practices between Central Asian countries. Thank you.
European Association of Jehovah's Christian Witnesses, Belgium, and then Ukrainian Christian Evangelical Church will now take the floor.
Thank you. I would like to address the situation in three countries, beginning with Kyrgyzstan. The Constitutional Chamber of the Supreme Court of Kyrgyzstan has made significant progress in implementing the right to freedom of religion. In November 2013, it ruled in favor of the right to conscientious objectors to receive alternative civilian service, and Parliament has now implemented that judgment. Last year, in September 2014, the Constitutional Chamber declared unconstitutional part of the religion law that made it impossible for minority religions to obtain registration. Unfortunately, that decision has not yet been implemented. That's led to serious problems in Kyrgyzstan. Just last month, in the city of Osh, more than 50 Jehovah's Witnesses were peacefully meeting together for worship, and a group of police raided the meeting and brutally beat some of those in attendance. The police justified their actions by claiming Jehovah's Witnesses need local registration. We call on Kyrgyzstan to implement the 2014 judgment of the Constitutional Chamber and to prosecute the police who committed this attack. In Kazakhstan, in 2013 and 14, more than 70 Jehovah's Witnesses were arrested simply for attending religious meetings and fined more than 750 euros each. A number of these cases are now in the United Nations Human Rights Committee. We're pleased that for the first 9 months of this year, there were no arrests. However, we're disappointed that just last week, a citizen of Uzbekistan who was in Kazakhstan with his family was arrested and ordered deported simply for attending a religious service. We call on Kazakhstan to implement the recommendations of the United Nations Special Rapporteur and affirm the right to peacefully manifest religious beliefs without registration. And finally, Azerbaijan. On February 17, 2015, 2 Jehovah's Witness women were arrested and placed in pretrial detention. They're still in detention in Baku in the Ministry of National Security. Their crime? Discussing the Bible with neighbors using a religious publication that was approved for import by the Committee of Religious Affairs. We call on Azerbaijan to immediately release these 2 women and cease the criminal case. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Ukrainian Christian Evangelical Church, followed by the European Federation for Freedom of Belief.
Старший епископ Украинской христианской.
The elder Archbishop of Donetsk, Leonid Podun, distinguished participants. A year ago, as was the case of many other believers, I had to leave my home in Donetsk due to the threat to my life by the so-called representatives of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic. Our church was violently taken over and our property was ruined and stolen. Representatives of the DPR have deprived believers of the ability to pray on the premises of their church. Currently, the main church building is being cynically used by armed persons of the DPR for drunken dances. This is a violation of the rights and a serious insult to the believers. Some believers have been held without food and water for up to a week. We have called insistently on the representatives of the DPR to return our property, but they refuse to do so. This reminds us of the time of the Soviet regime. Returning the church to the believers in Donbass seems to be impossible now. My request is that the participating states of the OSCE, ODIHR, and other monitoring missions of the OSCE in Ukraine do the following. Please carry out an independent monitoring of the issue of religious freedom in Donetsk and in eastern Ukraine, as well as of the situation of human rights. Please promote the return of seized church property to the believers as soon as possible, and return to them their ability to gather together and help one another. May God bless you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. The European Federation for Freedom of Belief will now take the floor, followed by Evangelische Kirche, Kingdom of God.
Thank you, moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm Alessandro Micarelli, a London-based human rights lawyer and spokesman of the European Federation for Freedom of Belief, also known as FOB, that I represent here today. Our federation is registered in Strasbourg and Brussels as a lobbying group since December 2014, and it consists of NGOs and individual members from 6 countries at the moment. We care about the right of all people to enjoy the right to freedom of belief, any belief, including religious, philosophical, and spiritual ones, in the European continent. Today we would like to address 2 main points as follows. Point 1, we officially demand the Italian government to issue a clear statement about what we call the abnormal anti-cult squad, in Italian Squadra Antisette SAS, that was established on 23 November 2006 with a simple letter of the then Chief of Police. So we asked the government to provide figures about the activities carried out by this unit of the Italian police, their effects in contrasting alleged criminal activities of religious groups they roughly label as cults, and providing evidence of the cost-benefit ratio, considering that so far all cases brought to courts, thanks to the SAS investigations, have ended in favor of alleged criminals, who were instead innocent people who suffered an unjust prosecution. Second point, we want to emphasize that even though the Italian constitution grants the right to freedom of belief and to practice religion to all people, and so does the European Convention on Human Rights, nonetheless, two Italian regional authorities, namely Lombardy and Veneto, have either passed or proposed legislations that prevent religious minorities from building up their own temples, churches, and mosques through a long series of requirements that only apply to minority groups, regardless they have or not an agreement with the government. It has also to be noticed that only in Lombardy, 50 temples have been closed down last year. Additionally, because of such legislations, Lombardy resident Muslims still don't have a proper mosque as September 2015. So we insist the Italian authorities comply with the Italian constitution and with the other international human rights instruments. Thank you.
Thank you. The Evangelische Kirche Kingdom of God will now take the floor, followed by the European Center for Law and Justice.
Distinguished participants, today I would like to talk about how, through the work of certain government experts, freedom of religion is undermined in Kazakhstan. Theology, as it exists today in Kazakhstan, is a tool of repression that is used by the authorities against inconvenient religious communities. A number of experts or specialists draw some conclusions which call into question their qualifications and indeed knowledge. Criminal cases are opened on the basis of stirring up religious strife, just because preachers speak about the resurrection of Christ and mention the fact that the Prophet Muhammad didn't rise again, but the Quran itself states that. Thus, today, many people in Kazakhstan, and indeed beyond, are worried about the fate of Kabdua Kasov Ikhlas, who has been arrested and is awaiting trial, and is a member of the Christian Church. Many are mystified by the fact that he's been charged under Article 174 of the Kazakhstan's Criminal Code for extolling a religion over another. And yet any religion will laud itself and deem itself to be true and closer to God than another one. Mr. Ikhlas is actually in need of medical assistance due to his worsening state of health, and he is currently held in a pre-trial detention cell in Astana. We call on the Kazakhstan's government to stop persecuting former Muslims who have preferred to make a religious choice in accordance with their call of conscience, because this strikes fear into the hearts of citizens of Kazakhstan and breaches their right to the freedom of religion and conscience. Thank you very much.
The European Center for Law and Justice will now take the floor, followed by the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe.
The European Center for Law and Justice recalls that Helsinki Final Act defined the right to conscientious objection as the right to act in accordance with the dictates of his own conscience. In 2010, the Council of Europe adopted a resolution reaffirming the right to conscientious objection in lawful medical care and inviting the member states to develop comprehensive and clear regulations which guarantee the right to conscientious objection. In 2011, the Parliamentary Assembly of the OSCE adopted a resolution recommended that laws related to the right to conscientious objection be assessed. A few years later, the same right was reaffirmed by the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Nevertheless, cases reported show that doctors, nurses, midwives, students for medical professions, pharmacists, and health institutions still cannot effectively exercise their right to conscientious objection. They are obliged to participate to acts contrary to their conscience or fired for acting according with their conscience. Thus, they find themselves excluded from those professions. Moreover, high public servants insult them and call for blacklisting them. For instance, midwife Elinor Grimark was compared to jihadists by Swedish Ministry of Justice, and Spanish UNESCO chair of bioethics called for a national registry for doctors who will not perform abortion. In these circumstances, the ECLG recommends to participating states to assess freedom of conscience legislations to fully secure conscientious objection, to refrain from interferences, and to modify legislation that discriminates or interferes with freedom of conscience. The ECLG requests OSCE ODIHR to implement its Parliamentary Assembly resolution of July 2011 and to recommend appropriate action to their member states. Finally, the ECLG recommends to employers to make possible the conscientious objection of medical staff. Thank you.
Thank you. The Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians in Europe will now take the floor, followed by the Church of Scientology Human Rights Office.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Over the last 8 years, the Observatory on Intolerance and Discrimination Against Christians has documented over 1,500 incidents of intolerance and discrimination against Christians in the OSCE region west of Vienna. We are very grateful to OSCE and ODIHR for the seriousness with which the problem of intolerance and discrimination against Christians is being addressed. We would also like to congratulate ODIHR for its annual hate crimes report, to which we gratefully contribute the results of our research every year and to which we encourage participating states to contribute. Today we have 4 concrete recommendations to contribute to the promising work already being done. First, we respectfully remind participating states to combat underreporting by collecting disaggregated data on hate crimes against Christians. In some countries, vandalism against a Christian church is merely reported as vandalism against a public building. Secondly, we recommend to participating states to be aware of unintended discrimination, which could be a side effect of anti-discrimination or equality policies. Excessive regulation of private conduct often forces Christians to choose to either violate their sincerely held beliefs or abandon their businesses, professions, or even their liberty. An example of such an overbroad legislation is the proposed EU 5th Equal Treatment Directive. Thirdly, we reiterate our previous 2014 recommendations to OSCE to develop materials on how to combat intolerance against Christians, manuals on how to combat anti-Semitism and discrimination against Muslims have previously been developed. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude with a 4th recommendation. In light of the horrifying global developments, combating persecution of Christians outside the OSCE area must be a priority of the foreign secretaries of participating states in their foreign policy. My full remarks are at the distribution center. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. The Church of Scientology Human Rights Office will now take the floor, followed by the Coordination des associations et particulières pour la liberté de conscience.
Thank you. I wish to speak today on behalf of the religious community of Scientologists all around the world regarding violations of OSCE standards protecting the right to freedom of religion in Belgium. In 1997, the Belgian Parliament published a 670 pages report that stigmatized 189 religious organizations, including Baha'is, Buddhists, Scientologists, Seventh-day Adventists, Mormons, and Pentecostals, by labeling them as dangerous sects. And this parliamentary report led to public hostility, discrimination, and the stigmatization and marginalization of members of these religious groups. Also, starting in 1997, a Belgian prosecutor initiated an investigation directed at Scientologists and the Scientology religious community that has lasted for over 18 years and has infringed on the right of Scientologists to freely practice their faith in Belgium. This investigation is now scheduled for trial in October 2015. There is no question that inaccurate evaluations and interpretations of Scientology religious practices resulting in criminal charges represent an improper inquisition and that are expressly prohibited by numerous decisions of the European Court of Human Rights as well as fundamental OSCE standards.
Each and every day, multitudes of Scientology parishioners around the world participate in the rite of auditing. Auditing is a core religious practice of the Scientology religion based on a codified set of religious scriptures. Scientology ministers, church staff, and parishioners sincerely believe in, sincerely practice the religion and the auditing. This fact alone proves that the contemplation of a fraud charge with any reference to auditing is a violation of basic human rights. On behalf of the Scientology religious community, we call on ODIHR to implement legal standards regarding freedom of religion for prosecutors, similar to the 2004 ODIHR and Venice Commission guidelines for review of legislation, to ensure that such heresy trial never happen again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I now call on the representative of the Coordination des Associations et Particuliers pour la Liberté de Conscience, to be followed by SOVA Center for Information and Analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Moderator. Belgium is one country that interferes with the right to freedom of belief. The Belgian state has accomplished this by allowing the suppression of the right to freedom of belief by its intelligence service. Belgian state security, which conduct activities fueling hatred and intolerance towards members of minorities groups designated as sect. The government campaigns of intolerance targeting sect has resulted in an illegal monitoring of members of minorities religions simply due to their religion, association, and belief. State intelligence services in most other countries do not engage in investigation of peaceful religious organizations. Belgian state security is one of the few intelligence agencies in the world that continues to monitor, investigate, and target sects. Recently, in a new book entitled State Security Secrets by Lars Bove, exposed Belgian state security intelligence activities targeting so-called sects from the 1970s to the present, including the monitoring of a group that does nothing more than offer yoga courses throughout the country. While researching his book, Mr. Bove was provided secret reports, apparently by state security officials, on the Scientology religions. These reports reveal that although Belgian state security had been intensively monitoring Scientology organization and parishioners in Belgium since 1970, he had utterly failed to find any evidence whatsoever of improper activity that could be characterized as a threat of the security of Belgium. The 2014 reports of the High Committee, the government body that oversees Belgian state security, note that the intelligence community investigation of Scientology going back to 1970 has uncovered no wrongdoing. As the committee also notes, the role of the Belgian state security is an exception in the world of information services. The most democratic country even refused to implicate their information services in a surveillance of religious movements because they would harm religious freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The Center for Information and Analysis will now take the floor, followed by Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial.
Madam Moderator, distinguished participants, in Russia, the extremist law remains one of the main sources of danger to the freedom of conscience. Representatives of various religions are persecuted, including members of the Muslim community. Religious literature, especially Muslim literature, not radical literature, is often confiscated and banned. For instance, that was the case of Quran literature, and the Russian anti-extremist law is not effective when it comes to addressing security. On the other hand, it does limit the freedom of religion. It stigmatizes Muslims and creates an atmosphere of animosity. The representatives of many religious movements are often arrested or detained by the security forces, which use anti-Islamic rhetoric and exert a lot of pressure on these organizations. Ungrounded accusations against these organizations do not allow for an tolerant attitude towards them in society at large. In Russia recently, there was an amendment to the law on the freedom of conscience, according to which religious groups, even which do not intend to register as a legal person, have to inform the authorities about their activities and the places where their activities are carried out and their participants. This is in breach of confidentiality and privacy standards. These amendments were introduced out of security concerns, apparently, but we believe that they are counterproductive in this respect. We have submitted our full statement. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. The Anti-Discrimination Center Memorial will now take the floor, followed by the Human Rights Without Frontiers.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I will speak in Russian. В России правозащитные НКО избирательно под...
In Russia, there are selective repressions of NGOs. They are accused of being foreign agents or are eliminated. A number of NGOs have been accused of being foreign agents, and the argument that they should not receive foreign financing is not justified. LGBTI organizations have been persecuted for their upholding of the rights of sexual minorities. One organization was recognized as being a foreign agent, and the prosecutor in this case noted that there was a violation of the law of the Russian Federation. NGOs are able to appeal to the European Court on Human Rights. The Memorial Anti-Discrimination Center works together with other non-governmental organizations. We'd like to call on the OSCE to ensure the right to freedom of conscience in the Russian Federation and the protection of human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you. The Human Rights Without Frontiers will now take the floor, followed by Soteria International.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Since the year 2000, there have been no less than 25 decisions of the European Court of Human Rights in cases opposing religious groups in France. Two categories of cases emerge from this compilation. On the one hand, the relations between France and religious minorities called sects, and on the other hand, with Muslim communities. Our organization calls upon France to prevent and to prosecute any form of stigmatization and defamation of minority religious or belief groups and their members, to cancel its support to and its collaboration with private associations which stigmatize some religious groups and organize hostility and discrimination based on religion or belief, to give unimpeded and equal access to the spiritual assistance of their choice to prisoners of all religions or beliefs, to monitor the compatibility of the implementation of the laïcité principle with the international standards related to freedom of religion or belief, and to sanction or prosecute the state agents or private persons who violate them, to guarantee the equal access to school education to Muslim girls wearing headscarves, to end the criminalization of Muslim women who choose to cover their faces, and to find some legal accommodation while avoiding their marginalization, and finally to protect those who are coerced to cover their face or their whole body without excluding them from the public space. Thank you.
Thank you. Soteria International will now take the floor, followed by the delegation of Armenia.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues working to secure human rights. As always, this day of freedom of religion and belief is the busiest here. Hate crimes and discrimination based on religion increase. Soteria International many times advocates for the outcasts of religions, the so-called sects. A sect is who we all know is strange and subversive without needing to actually know anything about them. We may well conclude that the arbitrary use of the term sect illustrates a general lack of insight, substantial discourse, and personal experiences in the field of spiritual life. Information and insight have proven to be successful weapons to combat discrimination, such as racism, homophobia, discrimination of Roma, etc. Today, we have specific campaigns against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Christianism. Still, the core issue is not about protecting any specific religious group, but to stop the general ignorance and fear regarding religion and the role of spirituality in human life. Today, the inner human spiritual drive is met either by secular denial or dogmatic religious denial. Both cultivate religious intolerance, ignorance, and fear, leading to discrimination and hate crimes. By necessity, combating religious discrimination needs to shed light on the actual question: what are the common human spiritual principles and what is spirituality's role in human life? This should be the aim of national as well as international institutions. In Belgium, the Buddhist Tibetan organization Ogyen Kunzang Cholin, after 18 years investigation, the court recognized that the reasonable time had elapsed. This started in Belgium in 1997 with the sect list, which created lots of stigmatization and social marginalization. From our field investigations in the Czech Republic last month, we conclude that the Hindu mystics Dobesh and Plaskova and members of their religious group Poetry have been subjected to warrantless arrests, searches, and different forms of psychological pressure, threats, intimidation, and physical harm by Czech police solely due to their religious affiliation. Recommendations. We recommend the proper authorities to investigate the Yaroslav Dobesh and Barbara Plashkova case, especially when it comes to collaboration between police, prosecutor, anti-sect movements, and media. We recommend the Belgian authorities not use the sect list as a reference in any way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The delegation of Armenia will now take the floor, followed by the European Network Against Racism. Armenia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will start with concrete recommendations and then present background of them. Participating states should strengthen commitments to combat violent extremism based on the religious grounds against individuals and religious communities. They should prevent use of their territories by terrorist organizations, including Al-Nusra Front and ISIL, for cross-border attacks of religious minorities in Syria and Iraq. States should address the issue of restitution and compensation for religious property through dialogue and consultation between governmental bodies and religious or belief communities. ODIHR and field operations should assist participating states in education on and remembrance of genocides and crimes against humanity perpetrated against Christians. Civil society should highlight patterns on intolerance and discrimination, including with regard to past grave crimes perpetrated against Christians, in order to better understand and proactively address intolerance against Christians. The background of recommendations is the following. Christians and other religious minorities, including Yazidis, Alevis, and others, are subject to massacres and other crimes against humanity by religious extremists such as ISIL, Al-Nusra Front, and other terrorist organizations affiliated with Al-Qaeda. Grave crimes against humanity in regard to Christians are taking place in the same areas where a century back Christian nations were subjected to genocide. In September 2014, the sanctuary for the remains of the victims of Armenian genocide, the Armenian church in Syrian town of Deir Zor, was destroyed by terrorists, in sad yet symbolic link between past and present crimes against humanity. In recent years, the Christian population in the Middle East has decreased drastically, with perishing and mass exodus of Christians from the region. Ages-old traditions of interfaith dialogue and tolerance are being lost. The OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, in its Helsinki Declaration adopted this year, acknowledged the important role that parliamentarians should play in efforts to prevent genocide by condemning past genocides and raising their voices against ongoing massive and grave human rights violations, particularly against Christians and other ethnic minorities in Syria and Iraq. Thank you.
Thank you. The European Network Against Racism will now take the floor, followed by the delegation of Ukraine. The European Network Against Racism. Then I will ask the delegation of Ukraine to take the floor now.
Ladies and gentlemen, following the occupation and the attempt to annex the Crimean Peninsula, Muslims in Crimea have faced a number of challenges, such as Islamophobia, cracking down on dissent, ineffective Muslim institutions from not being allowed to carry out their activities. There has been a lot of pressure on Muslims, especially Crimean Tatars as well. There are restrictions on the dissemination of religious literature. Muslims are held in custody, and this is accompanied by systematic violations of human rights. We call on OSCE human rights organizations to cover all the human rights violations, especially those of Muslims. And in fact, the reports contain a lot of data about this. There is a lot of judicial arbitrariness. Muslims face trumped-up charges on grounds of extremism, and the right for various religious organizations who do not adhere to the same views as the authorities are infringed upon. Muslims are often considered to be an irritant there, and their life is made hellish. Thousands of people have become hostage of this situation. The authorities, or the occupying power rather, is committing repeated violations, and we see that this is taking its toll on relations with the Muslim communities in Crimea. I would like to recall the obligations of each state to fully implement international human rights laws and standards, and that Crimea is part of Ukraine's sovereign territory, and Muslims, like all citizens of the Crimean Peninsula, are citizens of Ukraine. Thank you.
The Ukrainian Orthodox Church Kiev Patriarchate will now take the floor, followed by the Institute for Religious Freedom.
I would like to focus on specific problems, and that is ensuring the right to religious communities in Ukraine to change their jurisdiction. This is enshrined in law, but in most cases there are conflicts. According to sociological studies, the Kiev Patriarchate is 40% of the population, and the Moscow Patriarchate 20% of the residents of Ukraine. The aggressive concept of the Russian world on the part of the Moscow Patriarchate makes it very difficult for people to leave this church. It is considered to be dependent on the Kremlin. A number of public statements have been made inciting to violence against followers of the Moscow Patriarchate. We call for the free determination by believers of their choice of church. The Moscow Patriarchate insists that the church belongs only to those who recognize its jurisdiction, and that those who would like to leave the Moscow Patriarchate are able to do so. This is a discriminatory approach. Up to this time, the Moscow Patriarchate has not wanted to solve this problem in a constructive way. Our attempts to hold a dialogue have been hindered. I'd like to take this opportunity of providing a specific proposal that representatives of the OSCE and of Ukraine have a constructive negotiation together with groups from our two churches, the Moscow and Kiev Patriarchates, in order to arrive at a solution. We believe that the ownership of the church belongs to the respective denominations. 25 years ago, this was how the Moscow Patriarchate itself resolved a conflict with the Catholic Church. I would like to see whether or not the Moscow Patriarchate would like to solve this problem in a peaceful manner, or if it is only interested in confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you. The Institute for Religious Freedom will now take the floor, followed by Alma TQ.
Dear Madam Moderator and participants, recently there was published the report of the Human Rights Assessment Mission on Crimea. This report and results of monitoring by human rights defenders refer to numerous cases of systematic oppression, the religious freedom of the residents of the Ukrainian peninsula of Crimea after its occupation by the Russian military troops. Among them are the obligatory registration of all religious and non-governmental organizations that entails requirement of obtaining the Russian citizenship. Also the illegal searches and confiscation of religious literature under the occasion of extremist charges, and the rise of rent fees for the places of worship. Besides this, the deportation of the objectionable church clergy from Crimea by refusing to grant them as foreigners with a temporary residence permit, while some of them have been threatened, beaten, arrested, and even tortured. As it's well known, for all of these terrible violations of the fundamental right to freedom of religion or belief in Crimea, the Russian Federation carries out the responsibility today because its representatives do not get tired to persevere in claiming Russian jurisdiction in Crimea. But the more important issue that requires the international community attention is the more brutal hate crimes and religious persecution by the armed pro-Russian separatists in the other part of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. The multitude of evidence and facts testify the religious intolerance which follows together with Russian aggression against Ukraine. By this time, still dozens of temples, other places of worship, remain captured by pro-Russian combatants. Based on facts gathered by human rights defenders, it can be stated that in Donbass the freedom of religious or belief is completely absent. That's why we recommend the ODIHR and the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission in Ukraine to conduct the monitoring of the religious situation in Donbass and make a report based on results. Donetsk and Luhansk region of Ukraine also require permanent, independent human rights monitoring. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Organization ALMA will now take the floor, followed by civil society organization Equal Opportunities.
Thank you, Madam. This statement is made on behalf of COC Netherlands, Almaty-Q LGBT organization in Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan Feminist Initiative. In Kazakhstan, state and religion are separated. By constitution, all citizens are protected equally in line with international human rights treaties. In society, religion plays an important role, and many Kazakhstani people are active believers, including LGBT people. Muslim leaders propagate a type of interpretation of Islam that promotes one type of family and affirms patriarchal gender norms. This leads to oppression of women and girls and LGBT people where they are not able to exercise their own freedom of belief. Religious leaders contribute to an environment of fear by making statements that LGBT people should be excluded from the religious community and their families. While Kazakhstan decriminalized homosexuality in 1998, a climate of homophobia and censorship remains. LGBT people live double lives trying to hide themselves. They cannot live fulfilling life without stigma and fear. It influences all aspects of their life. Fear that their sexual orientation or gender identity will impair their access to education, employment, and healthcare. Government does not protect LGBT people adequately against discrimination and violence and does not ensure their freedom of expression, thought, and belief. Freedom of thought in Kazakhstan is characterized by a deadly, overwhelming silence, widespread homophobia, media narrative, the failure of police and government to protect people signal continuing human rights violation and decreasing space for freedom of thought. LGBT people are entitled to equal protection under the law and equal access to their human rights. We recommend the Kazakhstani government and the OSCE to raise the issue of homophobic rhetoric, discrimination, censorship, and acts of violence against LGBT people in routine and high-level meetings with government. Ensure that hate speech by religious and other community leaders against LGBT people are investigated and judged. Create a dialogue in society on freedom of belief that is inclusive of diversity. Strengthen the capacity of LGBT organizations to monitor freedom of thought. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Equal Opportunities will now take the floor, followed by the Interfaith Council.
Okay, thank you. This statement is made on behalf of Equal Opportunity supporting LGBT people in Tajikistan. The overall position of LGBT people in Tajikistan is not good. They are not visible and can't live the life openly and safety. Radical Islamic and other religions leaders and mass media create negative perception and stereotypes of the LGBT community in society. This results in restriction of freedom of thought and expression. Street religion and cultural tradition do not allow the public to accept the LGBT community. Society is getting extremely radical and hate against LGBT people is widespread. All the homosexuality is not criminalized. Law enforcement officials are blackmailing and extorting young gay men. If the police expose the sexual orientation to the colleagues, family, and other, the gay men risk losing the job, being expelled from university, and excluding by the family. The social economic situation in Tajikistan was worsened. This has led to more aggression towards LGBT people. Thus, the situation has become more dangerous for LGBT people. They are the subject of public mockery and persecution, which force them to hide their sexual orientation and gender identity. We recommend the Tajik government and OSCE to involve LGBT organizations and other civil society in drafting laws and policies to combat stigmatization and discrimination of LGBT people and to protect the freedom of thought, train law enforcement to protect LGBT people equally, inform the public about tolerance and equality via campaigns and dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to the next speaker, I would like to remind the delegations that if they want to exercise the right to reply, the list is just behind me. And now I will give the floor to the Interfaith Council, and that will be followed by Open Viewpoint Public Foundation.
Thank you, moderator. Esteemed participants, I would like to present for your consideration a brief report on the following trends related to violations of religious minorities' rights in the Kyrgyz Republic. Unfortunately, the problem with the cemeteries for non-Muslims in the Kyrgyz Republic has still not been resolved. Many Protestants have to bury secretly their dead co-religionists on the territory of Orthodox graveyards or in fields that are remote from settlements in order to avoid any conflicts with religious majority. Nevertheless, there have been facts of interreligious conflicts and pressure toward abjuring a religion. For instance, in August 2015, Osh city authorities and a local imam did not allow a Protestant Christian woman to bury her deceased 20-year-old son in the local cemetery until she renounced her faith. The Kyrgyz authorities still allow local imams to control who is buried in the state-owned cemeteries not owned by any religious groups officially. Police often back obstructions of burials, in some cases actively participating in burial denials. The state officials fail to ensure people may bury their dead in the municipal cemeteries. But the problem with the graveyards is not the only one that proselytes in the Kyrgyz Republic encounter with. Another remarkable case of the violation of the right to the freedom of religion or belief occurred in February 2018 when a young Kyrgyz Protestant was deprived liberty and put into the nut house by her relatives in attempt to make her renounce Christian faith. The girl was hospitalized in the nut house and brought to coercive treatment without correspondent medical assessment that is required in such cases according to the Kyrgyz law. Such case is not unique in Kyrgyzstan and has been used against proselytes to force them to renounce their faith. The religious minorities in the Kyrgyz Republic have challenges practicing their faith traditions not only individually but also in communities. The state bodies suspended the activity of law-abiding religious minorities organizations based on unlawful statement that in the common use in Kyrgyzstan laterally, that the part of the local population is against the existence of the local non-Muslims communities in regions. Unfortunately, the discriminatory approach of the state authorities toward the religious minorities, especially Protestant groups, still remains in the Kyrgyz Republic. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. The Open Viewpoint Public Foundation will now take the floor, followed by the Human Rights Center Memorial.
Dear colleagues, the Forum on the Freedom of Religion or Belief on Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, conducted in July this year in Kyrgyzstan, concluded that the freedom of religion is one of the vulnerable freedoms in Central Asia. The overview of the OSCE recommendations on the analysis of legislation on the freedom of religion confirms that an individual cannot implement its personal freedom since there is a precondition to have a legal entity, whereas the main subject is a group. Starting from 2008, there is no improvement with the law on religion in Kyrgyzstan. OSCE ODIHR opinion on the freedom of, on the law on religion is not implemented yet, despite the fact that 2010 Kyrgyz constitution incorporated the international human rights standards. The report on the implementation of ICCPR and Covenant on Economic and Social Rights in Kyrgyzstan says that religious believers are often a subject for discrimination on the grounds of fighting with extremism, when religious believers are not terrorists. The term of extremism needs the correct legal definition and corpus delicti to avoid illegal interference to activity of lawful religious groups. Kyrgyzstan is a secular state. All universal rights are presented in the Kyrgyz constitution, but it also states that there is no state religion in Kyrgyzstan. In fact, the Muslim majority as well as religious minorities are under the pressure of the law enforcement bodies or the State Commission on Religious Affairs. Overview and implementation on amendments of the laws during the last 2 years indicates more restrictions and for registration and activity of religious group. The non-discrimination is not respected. The minorities may not freely operate and register a legal entity due to bureaucratic requirements. Changes in the government bodies, street address are subject for registration under the complicated procedure. Registration of religious communities is obligatory. Initially, it required 10 initiators, currently 200. In one of the draft law, it was 500. The believers are limited in enjoying the freedom to information. The law also says the religious books in especially designated areas.
Thank you very much. Before I give the floor to the last two speakers, I would like to say to our delegations that the right to reply duration will be limited to 1 minute and 30 seconds. And now I would like to give the floor to the Human Rights Center Memorial, followed by the Order of St. Andrew.
Distinguished participants, there are serious problems in a number of OSCE participating states with the unjust limitations on religious freedom based on the so-called anti-extremist legislation. Recently in Russia, there was much discussion about a case in which a judge in South Sakhalinsk banned the book Prayer to God, Its Meaning and Location in Islam on the grounds that it quotes the Quran. Quotes from the Quran were recognized by local experts as being extremist, quote unquote. This judgment is being appealed. However, a number of other books, brochures, articles, and videos with religious content remain on lists of banned materials, including thousands of titles, and the list is growing with surprising rapidity. Our monitoring shows that in examining cases in which religious literature is banned, there is no possibility for independent experts to be involved, nor are there effective appeal mechanisms. Experts have repeatedly noted that the unclear definition of extremism in Russian legislation creates the possibility for overly broad and arbitrary interpretations, which is at the base of many bans and criminal convictions, including prison sentences. Now, a number of my colleagues have recalled this problem. I'd like to add that we are concerned by the copying of this negative Russian experience by other countries of the CIS. I'd like to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the fate of the Muslim civil society activist from Bashkortostan, Rustam Latipov, who in 2013 and 2014 participated in the HDIM meeting here in Warsaw and spoke repeatedly in this hall on religious freedom. This February, he was arrested on false charges of extremism. However, anyone who studies his statements in Warsaw or at other events, his publications, interviews, or looks at his Facebook page can clearly see that this person is not an extremist or a radical. Despite his disability, Latipov is now in detention in difficult conditions, and he was recently forced to go on a hunger strike to protest the violation of his rights. He risks a lengthy prison sentence. So I would like to ask you especially to pay attention to this case. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last speaker on the list is the Order of St. Andrew. Please.
Good afternoon, Madam Moderator. On behalf of the Order of St. Andrew the Apostle of America, I speak for the Orthodox Ecumenical Patriarchate headquartered in Istanbul, Turkey. Turkey has been on a watch list for religious freedom violations. Recently, on April 30, 2015, Turkey was in the list of countries of particular concern of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. I'm here to present to you several issues of extreme importance to our Orthodox Patriarchate in Istanbul, all interrelated and all impeding freedom of religion in Turkey. Number one, freedom to conduct religious services. In 2010, the Turkish government allowed divine liturgies in the Sumela Monastery near Trabzon, in the House of the Virgin Mary near Selçuk, and a few others. This is a step forward. However, the Turkish government converted into mosques two historic and important Orthodox churches, Hagia Sophia near Sumela and Hagia Sophia of Nicaea, and this is many steps backward. In 2014, the Turkish parliament asked to turn Hagia Sophia in Istanbul into a mosque, and this has upset the world. On May 21, 2014, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom stated that opening Hagia Sophia as a mosque would clearly be a divisive and provocative move. Number two, closing the only theological school of Halki. In 1971, the Turkish government arbitrarily and forcibly closed down the only theological school in Turkey at Halki. On November 20, 2014, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom issued several statements. The Halki seminary still remains closed. The government interference in patriarchal elections is number 3, and the no legal identity or legal personality is number 4. In conclusion, the order respectfully submits that the Turkish government complies with the tenets of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, to which it has committed, and without further delay, it publicly commits the Hagia Sophia remains a museum, permits the reopening of the Theological School of Halki, and officially recognize the legal personality, allows for the return of confiscated property in Turkey, and stops interfering with the election of ecumenical patriarchate. Thank you.
Thank you. With this, we have closed the speakers list, and we have 9 delegations on the list for the right to reply. We will start with Tajikistan, followed by Italy. Just a reminder, it's 1 minute and 30 seconds. Tajikistan, please.
We would like to respond to what was said by the United States delegation as regards the registration of religious organizations and relating to the freedom of expression. The law is in line with international standards of human rights, including Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil Rights and other relevant documents. As regards the document concerning the responsibility of parents for the bringing up of their children and the ban on minors from taking part in sect activities, this law is underpinned by many factors, including the protection of the rights of the child to education and to normal development. We believe that some institutions have a religious nature, education institutions that is, and therefore that women who do not wish to visit mosques is a decision that was taken by a center on the basis of guidance from a high religious leader. As regards the statement said by the one of the organizations that spoke about Tajikistan, Voice of Liberty, there are no restrictions, unlike what they mentioned. Those were unfounded allegations. Thank you.
Thank you. Italy will now take the floor, followed by Ireland. Italy, please.
Grazie.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Italy would like to use its right of reply to refer to the criticisms made by 2 non-governmental organizations. If I took note, it was the European Liberal Forum and the European Federation for Freedom of Belief. The first NGO accused Italy of having placed limits on the freedom to have an abortion based on freedom of conscience. My answer is that no, this is not true, not at all. In Italy, it is possible to have an abortion. The law on abortion has existed since 1979, that is 36 years. It is true that at the very beginning, in the first years, there were some problems because there were a number of doctors who were conscientious objectors. But the rule was then established that in each hospital there be a sufficient number of doctors performing abortions. And so being a conscientious objector is a right, because for all religions, abortion is considered to be murder. So we cannot ask someone to commit an act which they consider to be homicide. If the number of abortions has decreased in Italy, it's because means of contraception have become widely distributed. Now, with respect to the anti-sect squads that were referred to, I'm referring to the accusation made by the second NGO. These are specialized groups in our police forces because there are satanic sects in Italy. This is a session on the freedom of religion, and you'll decide yourself whether you think that satanic sects should enjoy freedom of religion. These sects were committing crimes, and these crimes have been punished. Thank you.
Thank you. Ireland will now take the floor, followed by Greece.
And thank you. Ireland wishes to exercise its right of reply in relation to views expressed earlier this afternoon by Atheist Ireland, and to confirm once again that these have been noted and will be conveyed to the appropriate Irish authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. The delegation of Greece will now take the floor, followed by the Holy See.
Thank you.
With regard to the Greek citizens of Muslim faith residing in Rhodos and Kos, I would like to stress that they enjoy the same rights and have the same obligations as all other citizens. No treaty or other international instrument designates them as minority. Nevertheless, their religious and cultural rights are fully respected. Indicatively, in these two Greek islands in close proximity with Turkey, there are 3 mosques, 2 Muslim cemeteries, and 3 Muslim charitable foundations, which adequately cover the Muslims' religions and other relevant needs. In reply to the 3 points raised by the Greek Helsinki Monitor, firstly, I would like to point out that our penal code punishes only malicious blasphemy and insult of religions. Therefore, the expression of an opinion, however critical towards any religion, is not punishable under the penal code. The said provisions have been extremely rarely invoked anyway. Second, the existing provisions on religious oath have been in conformity with the European Convention of Human Rights and have led the Committee of Ministers to close the examination of the execution by Greece of a number of European courts' judgments following applications introduced by the said NGO speaker. Third, the aim of the circular mentioned is not to restrict freedom of religion, but to set out the conditions for the exemption from a compulsory course included in the school curriculum. Due to time constraints, my full remarks will be also provided in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you very much for respecting the time limit. The Holy See will now take the floor, followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I want just to signal that for the second time it was denied to the Holy See to take an active part in the deliberation. We're on the queue from 10 to 2 p.m. and it was not possible. I don't know about how many people, but it was not that number of the people. I was myself waiting for almost 1 hour in the queue. In taking the floor and exercising the right of reply, I want just to take the floor to exercise the right of reply to the intervention of Atheist Island, containing certain not accurate assertions. In fact, my yesterday intervention, right of reply, was just a simple reminder of the aim goal of the yesterday's session, and in this I quoted the annotated agenda of this AGDM, where it is stated: the aim of this session is to review the implementation of OSCE commitments, the review of the implementation of OSCE commitments. To this, I added, when speaking of hate crimes or tolerance and non-discrimination, there should be no de facto inclusion of issues related to so-called sexual orientation, gender identity, or LGBTI, given the fact that such a terminology cannot be found among the agreed commitments de jure of participating states and does not belong to the OSCE language. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you. I will now give the floor to Belgium, followed by the delegation of Turkey. And just a personal remark, I was surprised by the queue myself.
Perfect. So maybe something must be changed.
Belgium, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We would like to come back to a number of statements that mentioned Belgium. Firstly, the delegate who mentioned sacrifices. Sacrifices are not prohibited in Belgium, but they are only authorized in licensed institutions. There was a dialogue with the leaders of the Muslim community who recently issued a fatwa prior to the celebration itself, enabling them to use alternatives that are authorized. I think that the European Court of Human Rights made a decision about the coverage of some things that are not compatible with living in society, the living together, that is. Other statements touched upon sects in Belgium, and there is an ongoing legal case that I cannot comment on. Yet the the headquarters of Scientology, which is not far away from the Ministry for Justice, is open and invites people to take part. The list of sects is not a ministerial document, but a document that was an annex to a parliamentary document, and which contained all statements that were heard at the time by the parliament itself. Finally, on the activities of sects, it is monitored by the state. This was enshrined in a law on the 30th of November 1998, which enables the state to keep tabs on these organizations, which are sometimes negative organizations. Thank you.
Thank you. Turkey will now take the floor, followed by Azerbaijan. Turkey.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I once again listened to the very same claims regarding religious freedoms and tolerance in Turkey that were voiced merely hours ago in the last session. Let me therefore presume that the reply I gave this morning, also covering issues relating to the patriarchate, has not withered, and briefly stress 2 points. First, neither Muslim nor non-Muslim religious institutions can uphold legal personality under Turkey's secular system. There is therefore no discrimination whatsoever against any religious community in this regard. Furthermore, religious communities can and do conduct affairs requiring legal personality via foundations. Let me also remind that there is no OSCE commitment to grant legal personality to religious communities. We have the will to reopen the Halki Seminary on the basis of a sustainable formula, and deliberations on this issue are ongoing. But putting preconditions do not usually help. There are no plans, on the other hand, to the best of my knowledge, of converting the Hagia Sophia Museum to a mosque. Finally, I will call on participating states to join the international coalition against Daesh and other terrorist organizations operating in Syria and in Iraq, instead of making some conniving-sounding appeals devoid of any real content or action. If you want to be of use, then do something about it. Joining the coalition would be a nice first step. As to the allegation of genocide, our well-known views fully refuting these allegations were adequately voiced during the opening plenary. Thank you.
Thank you. Azerbaijan will now take the floor, followed by France.
Thank you. I would like to exercise the right of reply regarding 2 statements. The first statement was done by the distinguished US representatives, and the second statement was done by distinguished representative of European Association of Jehovah's Witnesses. Both statements are similar. In accordance with the law of the religious belief of Azerbaijan Republic, distribution of religious literature that promotes hatred and intolerance toward others is forbidden. Therefore, all imported books are being carefully examined by experts. The representatives of Jehovah's Witnesses in Azerbaijan were detained by police because they were involved in distribution of literature which did not get authorization. Thank you.
Thank you. The delegation of France will now take the floor, followed by the delegation of Armenia.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. 3 points were addressed to France. First, from the about sects, the state has not persecuted any group for its religious beliefs unless there have been common law crimes that have nothing to do with religion, such as violence against children or other crimes. Secondly, young Muslim women are obviously welcome in schools. The law of 2004, which attempted to preserve schools from religious quarrels, prohibited the wearing of ostentatious religious symbols in public schools, irregardless of the religion. This measure is understood by a majority of Muslims and the number of cases that are problematic is a minority today, and they are dealt with on a local basis through dialogue. Thirdly, the French law of 2010, which prohibits the total coverage of the face in public areas, is for obvious security reasons and is in no way based on religious reasons. And I would conclude by saying that all of this takes place in a rule of law state under the control of judges and, of course, the European Human Rights Court. Thank you.
Thank you. The delegation of Armenia will now take the floor, followed by the delegation of Ukraine as the last right to reply.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We thank the distinguished Turkish colleague for identifying himself. The fact that the territory of Turkey is used by fundamentalist terrorist groups who attack religious minorities in Syria and Iraq is not an Armenian invention. The numerous accounts of Turkish politicians, civil society, media, community and religious leaders, video materials and virtually thousands of eyewitnesses clearly establish that terrorist groups continue to use the territory of Turkey. The unconstructive attitude of Turkish delegation may indicate that Turkey prefers to be part of problem rather than solution. In our view, the country portrays itself as defender of the rights of one religious group in Europe could have shown more constructive attitude towards other religious groups in Middle East who are currently subject of mass atrocities. My country has received close to 20,000 refugees. We extend political and financial support to international actors as well as communities in Syria and Iraq. As for the allegations, I would like to mention that Turkey has better choice than to associate itself with the perpetrators of genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, the delegation of Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I take the floor to respond to the remarks made by representatives of Russian community NGOs from Crimea, the two of them, who not only sympathized the Russian occupying authorities, but last year facilitated Russia's violation of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Their interventions cannot obscure the facts of numerous and glaring human rights violations as independently reported by missions of the OSCE, the United Nations, the Council of Europe, and many other NGOs, including from Russia. The dire human rights situation in the occupied Crimea requires constant monitoring and response, including by the institutions of the OSCE, to seek Russia's compliance with its obligations as an occupying power under international law. Restoration of observance of human rights in the occupied Crimea requires Russia's return to the tenets of international law and reversal of illegal attempted annexation of Crimea, which remains an integral part of Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With this, we are closing working session 15, and I would like to thank the introducers and all the speakers for a very dynamic discussion. I would also like to thank the interpreters for their very hard and committed work. And I have one announcement to make, which is about the reception ODIHR will host today at 8 o'clock in the evening. In the place called Villa Foxel, which is just across the street from the reception place that took place at the beginning of HDIM. If you have any special transport needs, please come to the reception by 6:30 to the registration desk and make this known to the reception staff. Otherwise, at 7:30, a hostess will be meeting everybody in the lobby and will show you the place where the reception will be held. I would also like to remind you to leave kindly your headsets here in the room and to attend the side events, the schedule of which is displayed outside of the plenary. Thank you very much and wishing you a good evening.